Hello and welcome.
Yes, hello, and thank you for joining us in our Compassionate Schools webinar, Trauma Informed Care in Action. This is our first episode, and we're primarily going to focus on an introduction and overview to trauma informed care and how it applies to schools.
We are from the district mental health team, and I'm Linda Hughes. I'm a counselor.
And I'm Wendy Belfield, a social worker. And since we're unfortunately not able to provide this training to you in person, we've put our pictures on each slide where we're talking, so hopefully you'll be able to put a face to a name as we move through.
Here's what we're going to do today in this first episode. We're going to look at how the trauma-informed care, how it fits into compassionate school so that we have an understanding of a few important initiatives and how they fit together. We will give an overview of trauma-informed care tenets as our framework for these practices moving forward, and we will explore what cultural competence, equity, and intersectionality mean so that we can truly move towards genuinely being trauma-informed.
So let's start with compassionate schools. What does that even mean, and how does it fit in with our other district priorities and initiatives? So let's take a look at how all this work connects. This is our graphic representation of how we see that connection. Why did we choose a plant? Well, we thought about a school as a living organism, something that requires nourishment and tending. It's a complex structure with multiple components, all of which are necessary to ensure that our schools thrive. In viewing a school through that lens, we can see how all of the components are not only connected, but they're actually dependent on one another for mutually assured success. Today, before we discuss any interventions, we'll review one of the primary elements of trauma-informed care to establish a foundation for the successful application of any trauma-sensitive practice. If you're interested in learning more about the foundational knowledge behind trauma-informed care and maybe diving a little deeper, we're going to be publishing a trauma-informed care overview training on our My Learning course, so you can look for that in the future. So these are the 5 principles or tenets that help us define and cultivate the framework for trauma-informed care and trauma-sensitive practices. These are the 5 tenets that Pasco County Schools has embraced: safety, transparency, predictability, voice, and choice. There are a lot of other principles out there that help to sort of underpin things, but we're going to focus on these for our webinar today. So let's start with psychological safety and physical safety. We start there because, as you can see in Maslow's hierarchy that we have here in the triangle, safety is one of the foundational needs that humans have. So when we think about psychological safety as a component of safety, it can be hindered when there's sarcasm, lecturing, put-downs, outbursts, public humiliation, negative like voice or body language, unfairness, blaming and shaming, things like that really hinder our ability to establish a psychologically safe environment.
In contrast to that, though, the psychological safety can be promoted when everybody feels that they have a chance to be heard, when we offer predictability within the workplace, when we validate thoughts and ideas, when we demonstrate flexibility and respect.
So when we think about the next 2 tenets, transparency and predictability, we're thinking about them as a means of building trust. And trust is maybe the most important characteristic of a solid, healthy relationship. Building trust involves a lot of things, not the least of which are transparency and predictability. So believing that someone is earnestly providing you with necessary and relevant information, being able to reliably anticipate or predict an outcome or an event or behavior, those are foundational characteristics of trust. And without trust, our relationships are vulnerable. We have a harder time convincing others that it's safe to become vulnerable and to take safe educational and interpersonal risks.
We can all probably speak to the importance of transparency and predictability in our work lives when things are kind of spur of the moment, or we are not given the information on the why behind changes. And when that happens a lot, it's hard to feel a sense of trust.
The final two tenets are voice and choice. And when we think about voice and choice, we're thinking of that through the lens of opportunities for empowerment and collaboration. So, voice and choice are empowering in that they give us each a sense of being heard and respected and a part of things. And we think about what that might be like in our own lives when we're not given voice and choice.
Again, that's a perfect example back to our workplace, right, Wendy? When we're not given voice and choice, when decisions and initiatives happen without us understanding that they're coming, or we don't have input into them, or choice about how they're rolled out, it can really impact our own engagement in those initiatives.
Exactly. And then think about what a difference it makes when we are offered voice and choice in the workplace. So when we feel like there is shared decision making with our administration or with our team leaders or our directors or supervisors, when we feel like our voice is really being heard by those folks. So even if we're expressing an opinion that's not necessarily accepted as the way to move forward, we're still feeling like our voice is being heard. Those are important ways to empower and build collaboration in a school environment. So, if you could take a minute and read over this definition of cultural competence according to the National Education Association. I'm just going to pause for a second and let you do that. As we explore trauma sensitive skills and strategies throughout this whole webinar series, we'll also explore the understanding and mindset that underpin our efforts. Cultural competence is an important underpin to trauma sensitive practices. Being culturally competent provides us with better opportunities to connect with our students and their families. It helps reduce the risk of misinterpreting attitudes, behaviors, and situations, and it can improve our chances of success when we deploy our strategies and interventions. In this way, cultural competence plays a significant role in our efforts to create and maintain equity in our relationships, our teaching practices, and our learning environments for our students, their families, and also for one another. One of the very first steps to becoming a culturally competent educator is to raise our awareness of our own cultural connections and how those connections shape the way we view the world and the people around us. The goal here is to begin to peel back the layers of identities and connections that make us all human, and to acknowledge that those cultural identities and connections influence the way we see, experience, and understand the world around us.
So this is a slide related to this word intersectionality. Just take a moment and read what intersectionality is. I know that you've all had moments where you've really deeply connected with a family and you've created a space where they felt truly seen and heard, and there's nothing more fulfilling than those moments. And it could be with a family that is very, very different from you. And that's something that we have the privilege to do in education. It's a great honor to really take care of and educate children. There are many aspects to one person's identity, and some things might give us privilege, and other aspects of identity can feel like they are often brakes. There are brakes on while we're trying to move forward. Some aspects may be like an accelerator, and other parts of us may serve as brakes. So to know about one aspect of a person, whether it's a visible difference or an invisible part of who that person is, and then make generalizations about who that person is or what they need, can really oversimplify how different parts of our identity are actually part of a whole, a dynamic whole. You could be talking with a student who you found out is transgender and make the understandable assumption that the student's gender is a source of a lot of stress. I say it's understandable because we do know that from our mental health data in PASCO that is statistically likely and can certainly is something to keep in mind. It might be true for that particular student, but it might not be. That student might have a lot of affirming family, lots of social support, A bigger concern for that person right now might be a learning issue, or the recent death of a grandparent, or a parent losing a job. The student might be a person of color who has well-educated parents. So each of these parts of the student's life and identity can play off one another, and one single thing doesn't define a person. We know that people are multifaceted, right? And we don't want to take a shortcut into trying to connect. Even when we are being supportive and we have the best of intentions, we may be filling in those blanks with what we don't even know what we're filling them in with. It might be a conscious or an unconscious bias. Just as we wouldn't want to be seen or defined according to only one aspect of ourselves. So reflecting on our own perspective and then really listening isn't easy, peeling back those layers. And yet every child and every family in our community is worth it.
So now that we're maybe starting to see how our understanding of cultural competence and intersectionality impacts our ability to create opportunities for growth and equity, or conversely, to dismantle those opportunities, let's take a look at this quote from Brené Brown. She says, "What we are ethically called to do is create a safe space in our schools and classrooms where all students can walk in and, for that day or hour, take off the crushing weight of their armor, hang it on a rack, and open their heart to truly be seen." For those of you who might be unfamiliar, Brené Brown is a social worker, a researcher, an author, and a speaker. And a lot of her research has been focused on trauma, shame, and vulnerability. So her insights into human behavior are really worth taking a look at. Here, Brené is calling us to action, to acknowledge that many of our students arrive in our classroom fully armored and ready for battle. Not necessarily for battle against us, but against a world that their experiences taught them is unsafe, or maybe has taught them that their uniqueness is more often a brake than an accelerator. But if we can create a safe and compassionate environment with healthy adult relationships where they are fully seen for all that they are and all that they have to offer, maybe then they will feel comfortable and able to remove their armor. Because it's only when their armor is hanging on that rack that they will truly be able to be present and ready to learn. Maybe that call to action feels like it might be a heavy lift, right? It's a lot to consider, especially when our days are already so scripted that it's hard to find a place to begin. So where can we begin? This quote is from Alicia Keys' book. She says, "We shift ourselves not in sweeping pivots, but in movements so tiny that they're hardly perceptible." This quote is referring to her own experiences as a child when she was trying to fit in at school and to be liked and accepted. And she said years went by before she realized that she didn't even have a sense of self beyond the messages she received from other people. Because as she was trying to assimilate into her educational environment, she didn't just wake up one day and decide to make this sweeping pivot and change everything about herself. Rather, the adjustments she made to her clothes, her speech, her hair were just a series of tiny little movements that she made over time towards a cultural norm that she unconsciously thought made her like everyone else, made her normal. It happened to her, and it happens to others so subtly and so subconsciously that not only did she not recognize it, but we might not recognize it either as the educators, as the adult role models in her life. So how is this relevant? Like, what can we do about that? Well, one thing we can do is maybe flip that idea around. What if we can say to ourselves that we don't have to expect ourselves to make sweeping pivots towards cultural competency or towards intersectionality, understanding of intersectionality or equity? What if we can make our own tiny movements, starting with inclusivity and starting with something small and simple, like the graphics we select for various presentations or posters or handouts? I'll use myself as an example. The picture on the left was the first picture I selected when I was looking for an introductory slide to this presentation. I literally just plugged into Google Images a classroom of children, and that's the one on the left is the one that came up, and that's the one that I inserted into our presentation. Until Linda pointed out to me that everyone in the photo was pretty white. And I was like, oh, I didn't even notice that. An unconscious bias on my part. So, being mindful about the subtle messages that we send to the children in our schools is a tiny movement we can make towards cultural competence and towards representation, equitable representation. So, I intentionally looked for a classroom that had some diverse students in it. It's not a perfect picture, but it's a start.
As we ready ourselves for these tiny movements, taking these reflections, the first step is to really check in on ourselves. Trauma-informed care, trauma-sensitive practices start with us. What you are doing as an educator is so purposeful. You went into this profession with your heart and mind and a lot of elbow grease, and with all the demands on you, with everything on your plate, it's easy to get into that give, give, give mode. And then we can simply just run out of gas if we don't stop to refuel. Burnout is a real thing. So let's just take a moment now and pause. Take a deep breath. Let that out slowly and ask yourself, how am I doing with taking care of myself? How do I feel like I'm doing given what's currently on my plate? Maybe there are shoulds that pop up. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed. Maybe you feel like you've really worked hard, especially during these times, to find that balance because it is so challenging. There are lots of ways to refuel and to connect with that love of life that we carry. Invest in yourself. If you are feeling out of balance, or if there's something that is sapping your energy, use those fabulous EAP benefits. They're wonderful. We can even do virtual therapy now. Balancing is an ongoing process, isn't it? And remember that the things and people that connect you to your own peace and joy, remember those things and find creative ways to dive into them, plug into them to refuel you. In that spirit of compassion for ourselves, here's a reminder. When we are learning new things or reflecting and shifting perspective, we can first understand things intellectually, and it's another level of learning to be able to employ best practices and remain emotionally regulated when we're under stress. So what does learning look like? Many of us like to move from beginner to mastery in one fell swoop. We might give up on things or be hard on ourselves when learning new things and not being immediately advanced. So it's uncomfortable to engage when it requires energy and there's that uncomfortable feeling of change. I love this visual because it normalizes the process of learning and implementation. So starting with stage 1, we don't know what we don't know. Stage 2 takes us to that conscious incompetence. We know that we don't know what we're doing. And stage 3, conscious competence. We are exerting a lot of energy and trying hard to do things in a new way. And then that unconscious competence. We integrate it into how we think and how we act, and there's automaticity to it. We don't have to think so hard. Practice, practice, practice. It's about maintaining compassionate grit.
So when we're thinking about having to help students remove their armor, and like Linda was saying, like keeping that compassionate grit, I love that phrase. So there's a lot we're doing for ourselves. There's a lot we're keeping a mindfulness on ourselves around our own emotional regulation, and sometimes students create stress just through behavior or emotionality that's uncomfortable for us or that is throwing us off of our rhythm. So how do we get students to take off their armor and feel safe and feel seen and heard? Well, we're going to offer you a fresh look at the things you might already be doing. And hopefully, with a fresh mindset and an expanded view of our intentions, we'll be able to increase our opportunities to connect with our students as ongoing prevention. And then we'll hopefully offer opportunities to improve our chances of success with intervention, and then fortify our relationships with our students through restoration. This will be a continuous rhythm for how we apply our trauma-sensitive practices to our students, to their families, and to our relationships with one another. So let's revisit this school organism that we talked about at the beginning. Hopefully at this time we're starting to really see how the knowledge, understanding, and application of trauma-informed practices are integral to the nourishment of our school communities, and that our growth together is dependent on our ability to make connections, foster healthy relationships, and to thrive together.
The leaves and soil, like this is a great image, because if you think of PBIS, those behavior management structures and interventions that many of us have invested time and energy into, they create that structure and they give us tools. That high impact instruction, clearly that's going to be a main focus in our education system. And social emotional learning is that new powerful initiative where we are giving those skills to children, all with that soil of trauma-informed care. How we view things, what we look at, how we approach and understand interactions and emotional regulation, and within ourselves and with children and with colleagues. We're going to dive into all those relationships in our next episodes. So this first episode, it has been an overview of compassionate schools, focusing on the tenets of trauma-informed care and introducing the concepts of cultural competence, equity, and intersectionality. Come and join us next time as we dive into what looks like prevention, what that looks like when we're looking at prevention, intervention, and restoration as we get into the nitty-gritty of real-life education. I hope you take some time now to click on our Padlet and put in your questions, your reactions to this material today, or suggestions for future episodes. We also have a fabulous video for you to watch. Wendy was quoting Brene Brown earlier with the Armor, that social work researcher, and she has a video called Daring Classrooms. It's really good stuff, so check that out. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you take time to refuel yourselves. We know you're working hard out there, and it's amazing what you do for our students every day. Stay safe. Take care, everybody.
Yes, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.